haven't done one of these videos in a couple of years. Allow me to fix this most egregious of errors. And I'm sure that in 2 years, we've all become much more civil about the topics presented. I believe now we can tackle them with nuance and what's that ominous sound in the distance? Oh, nope! That's not an invitation to go to other videos and leave comments about this video. These will be removed and blocked. I've heard it all before, a dozen times over, having been a Danganronpa enjoyer for 8 years. If your instinct is to go, no, actually, my comment is different, it is not. I assure you, it is not. Go find something else to watch. Please. There. Now that that's all out of the way, let's start the video for real. You may remember this video, in which I examined Chapter 3 of Danganronpa 2 and proposed a similar premise. I no longer agree with a lot of the opinions expressed. I do personally wish Hiyoko had survived a little bit longer, but I don't think that her development was absolutely necessary to the narrative. It was more akin to the tragedy of Kiyotaka's development. In fact, I think it was done better because Hiyoko made the active choice to try and improve, rather than the choice being spun on by her trauma. I also no longer think that fridging Sonya Nevermind would fix her character, or Gundam and Kazuichi's relationship. That video remains up as a time capsule, more than an accurate portrayal of opinion. Today, I'd like to aim my sights at a chapter where I have a lot more personal stake, having something in common with both of the usual criticisms of this case. For those unaware, I've got clinically diagnosed, otherwise specified dissociative disorder, and I am non-binary. Let's start with a summary of objective facts about this case. Then we can discuss what the aim was, where it fell short of achieving it, and perhaps how it could achieve it without falling on its face. Maybe by standards that did not exist at the time, but enough to satisfy anyone who is interested in genuinely analyzing this case, and perhaps taking into account how to be more respectful when addressing it.
I said certified freak. 7 days a week. What else?
So, let's start from the very beginning of the case, explaining the motive, and going from there. Monokuma delivers everyone's deepest secrets in an envelope. We learn Makoto's immediately from his role as the point of view character, which is that he had poor bladder control the entire time his age was a single digit. Some characters do want to get the embarrassment over and done with regarding their fellow classmates, so it's not as painful when Monokuma reveals them to the world in 48 hours, but the majority vote of shut up wins out. About 24 hours or so later, Chihiro turns up dead, and Toko won't leave her room. The trial happens, and whoa! It turns out Toko has dissociative identity disorder, and has a way more energetic alter-named genocider Sho that's a serial killer! But Sho didn't do it. Byakuya reveals both Toko's DID, and was the one to commit corpse desecration and tamper with the crime scene. But another twist happens. It turns out Chihiro
is designated male at birth, though I cannot say either way whether they identify as either or any gender, but nonetheless their ID recognizes them as male.
Dun fuck! Everyone swaps to he/him pronouns based on that evidence alone. Mondo falls for the I never said it was poison trope, and is probably the fastest culprit to surrender. Even Peko put up more of a fight. Though, of course, both have their buzz-cut friend / love interest / fuck buddy fight to the absolute bitter end of the case. Mondo confesses to his secret. His reckless behavior caused the death of Daya Owada, his older brother. Chihiro confessed their secret about being assigned male at birth to Mondo, and this pissed Mondo off enough for him to lash out and kill Chihiro, and try to keep that secret hidden in death. Which, didn't work. For manslaughter and second-degree murder, Mondo gets his insides liquefied, cremified, and re-solidified into a churned mass. You're welcome, that's exactly what happens. Very pleasant.
You did brick hard like a metal. I got 3.
Now, this is a part of the case that a lot of naysayers say I got wrong, and often suggest that if I got it right, I would stop accusing the case of being dated, shall we say. While I can certainly acknowledge what the case was trying to do, and this is what this section will be doing, I can also confidently state that for a lot of the problematic elements of the case, it does jack shit to offset them. So, common consensus is the case is intended to be a commentary on toxic masculinity. And I think there's some very good ideas in here. Toxic masculinity, though I imagine it means different things in Japan to the West, is something many cultures have strong issues to contend with, mostly thanks to the West, and I do think that addressing that is a good idea. It's a topic a lot of authors only touch in how it affects women, so having the narrative center around how toxic masculinity also affects men negatively, and how it affects different men in very different yet equally negative ways, is an excellent and interesting angle to take. Mondo is clearly intended to represent the masculine ideal. He is tall and muscular, even if not to Sakura's extent. He's outwardly tough and outspoken, and solves most problems by trying to brute force his way through. His presentation is one of extreme social idealization of what is the masculine ideal. And yet, do his free time events and you'll learn to some degree, he's also lacking quite a few of those traits beneath the surface. He won't raise his fist at women, he absolutely sucks at talking to women as they make him nervous. And while he had a dog in the past, typically seen as a masculine animal, it's a small dog and is a breed more associated with women. Now, these gender roles for animals based on their entire existence is stupid, but it does provide us with good shorthand when trying to explain this concept, which is that Mondo's masculinity, his strength, is largely surface level, and it's the shell he presents in order to keep up his image, especially as leader of a Baiki gang. Underneath the projected image, Mondo doesn't fit this ideal, and he is deathly afraid it means he isn't worthy of his position, especially since he only got it because he was being reckless with Daya and got him killed. He has anxieties around women, anxieties around his gang members, anxiety about his very position in life. Mondo is strong in his body, but weak in his mind. On the other hand, Chihiro is about as far from a masculine ideal as you can get. And yes, just by talking about masculinity, I will refer to Chihiro with they-them pronouns for the sake of simplicity. Big, tall men are considered masculine, but Chihiro is the smallest in their class, very willowy, and could probably be bowled over by a stiff breeze. They dress in skirts and frilly shirts with knee-high socks and Mary Janes. The other Mary Janes? Well, dudes, just put on that outfit and go out into public in a conservative area and let me know how many streets you got down without being assaulted. Chihiro prefers to take a more methodical approach to their problem solving and is an incredibly soft-spoken and timid person. And on top of all that, while Mondo's first resort is violence, Chihiro would even knock a blood-sucking parasite off their arm in the fears that they would kill him. They're hypersensitive and just as insecure as Mondo, and for a lot of their time in the game, does try to keep the secret of their assigned gender at birth away. In Chapter 1, it was easy since there was no reason to question it. Chapter 2, however, puts a ticking time bomb on that revelation. And yet, Chihiro is one of the ones that wants to confess to the secret. Monokuma's threat kicks Chihiro into action, and they take steps to face what they perceive as a weakness head-on and get stronger. Chihiro never sets out to become more violent or vulgar, which is why I have a lot of issues with Falungons that present them becoming such as positive character development. Chihiro's development is about being stronger so they can face their own fears and weaknesses and overcome them, not about becoming someone who can say fuck. Chihiro's body is weak, but their mind is strong. That dichotomy, physical prowess versus mental fortitude, is the basis for the second case. Chihiro seeks out Mondo, seeing him as the masculine ideal that he projected. Chihiro decides to tell a secret to him and asks for his help getting stronger. Mondo grows furious, not at what Chihiro was actually saying, but at the fact that they were strong enough to face those parts of themselves that were weak, stare them down, and promise to act against them and overcome them. It's something Mondo can never do because as the masculine ideal, he's cut off from those sincere emotional outlets, fearing that they make him seem less manly and less worthy to lead the Crazy Diamonds. To see someone so far from that projection of masculinity display such strength fed on Mondo's insecurity, and he lashed out and killed Chihiro. It's the one time in the series where no one went into the case with killing intent, but character flaws left the case happening. I think that that's incredibly powerful. The roles that had been set out for them by an uncaring society making up arbitrary rules set the stage for a complete tragedy, and it's for a world that we later learned was destroyed. As for Toko and her revelation of dissociative identity disorder, I have a lot less to say. The intent is very clearly to subvert the evil serial killer alternative trope, which yeah, no, that trope played straight is offensive as all hell. Sorry, not sorry if you're offended by that statement. I'll talk more about it in part 3, but she's intended as a red herring for the case, and is largely to show that Byakuya sees everyone as beneath him, and he's completely content to desecrate a crime scene and frame a mentally ill girl for murder to display that to everybody, especially with the revelation that he knew Mondo was the culprit all along, but didn't speak up. So, now with all of that established, let's talk about how that doesn't undermine what's wrong with the case.
I did not shit my pants.
So before we get to the elephant in the room, I'd like to actually discuss Toko first, since though people with DID and OSDD, and gender nonconforming people, experience dehumanization in different ways, because of the rest of Byakuya's characterization as an asshole at this point, it's generally also seen as an asshole move for him to out Toko to the class. And I agree, this is an asshole move. But because it's framed as an asshole move, I actually don't have that much of a problem with this element of the case. It clearly establishes Byakuya as someone who cares so little for those around him that he thinks nothing of revealing that information. As for the alter being a serial killer, yeah, this trope is offensive, has been offensive for a long time, and will keep being offensive far into the future. But I think Sho, especially by time of Ultra Despair Girls, is about as inoffensive as this very offensive trope can get. For one, after Sho's reveal, she isn't shoved aside. She becomes a character in the narrative as well, with her DID actually playing a positive spot of relevance when it becomes clear that Junko didn't wipe out her memory specifically. Furthermore, while, of course, being a serial killer is generally bad, it's actually played pretty neutral in terms of its morality in this particular instance, and has a pretty clear cause that isn't my superpowered evil side likes to murder. And sure, Sho enjoys violence, but her targets are very specific, handsome men, and that is very clearly tied to Toko's trauma. From the very beginning, Toko's life was bad. Both of her parents failed to show up to her birthday. My apologies, wrong script. It's here somewhere. Ah, there we go. Toko was born on the same date as her half-sibling, who died in a medical accident. It's unspecified, which means it could be anything from an incubator malfunction to, whoops, Butterfingers with a newborn baby. Both mothers wanted their baby dead, and both babies had the same father. Some people call the mothers lesbian icons responsible for Toko's own sapphic feelings. Let me ask you, do you think Toko's mothers effectively utilized girl-loving girl power when they locked their child in the closet for 3 days without food? Because they did that. Toko didn't have much of a better time at school either, with her being constantly bullied, including an incident where she was framed for a theft and tied to the jungle gym with a hose. Her only two comforts were novels and her only friend, a pet stink bug named Kamako that she believed was magic and could understand her feelings. Given her skepticism, I don't think she believed it because she actually thought it was true, but because she needed the slightest bit of hope to cling to— Oh. Yeah, no, that is legitimately a special stink bug.
When do we get to why Genocider still exists?
We will get there when we get there! Toko had a crush on a boy in her class in elementary school. He was moving to Shikoku, and Toko decided to write him a love letter. She later found that love letter stapled to the notice board to mock her. Toko already didn't have a lot of trust for anybody. She gave this boy a little trust, and he broke it in a way that opened her up to even more harassment. If that happens to your friend, sibling, someone you're close to, so close you physically cannot be separated, you likely want to protect them. When you're 8 to 11 years old, with parents, peers, and faculty who just don't care about you, there aren't many ways to take protection into your own hands. But there are a few. One that ensures he can't hurt you again. It's an extreme, but it's the only option where he won't be able to tattle on you. That boy was then murdered by Genocider Sho. Toko has nobody to protect her. Kaneko is her pet and friend, but stinkbugs can only really, sting, and if she tried to defend Toko, she'd get squished. Nobody will protect Toko, and she isn't strong enough to protect herself. Hence, Genocider Sho, someone who finally will. Outside of the murdering, she is an extremely good representation of a system's protector. Some also think she might be a prosecutor, and she certainly has those shades to her, but I think personally she is far closer to a protector. And the murdering is how Sho protects Toko from being traumatized. Toko was asked out again during junior high. Americans call this middle school, and Australians call it doesn't exist. She spent 3 days and 3 nights preparing for the date, and then got ditched in the middle because she was only asked out because the dude lost a bet with his friends. It's not clear whether or not he was murdered, but given it caused Toko severe emotional trauma, we can probably take a guess. It's why Sho only went after handsome men, people Toko would crush on. From Toko's perspective, it meant she had to repress her interests. From Sho's perspective, she had to protect Toko from them. She'll never admit it, sure, since Toko hates Sho on account of the murders, and Sho hates Toko on account of being gloomy, but Sho still sees what she does as protecting Toko. For a non-system author, written in the late 2000s and 2010s, this is surprisingly accurate for dissociative identity disorder. There's the fact that most DID has multiple ulcers rather than one, and the politically incorrect term split personality thrown out, sure. The other slur was the translation team's fault, to be clear. But aside from that, and a few hiccups, I honestly think that Sho is a clumsy but decent representation of dissociative disorders. Of course, that's my opinion. I'm not the only system out there observing this, and some systems may be unable to get past the representation of Sho as a murderer. And that's fine. As for why Byakuya doesn't get killed, he probably should have and would have in normal circumstances. But there is the whole, you kill someone and get found out, you die. The fact Sho kills in a way that makes it very obvious that it's her, and that Toko can't stand the sight of blood, and most kills will result in some amount of blood, especially since there's only 1 or 2 people she can overpower and drown in the swimming pool, and Byakuya is not one of them. Speaking of, however, let's swap to them, and get to
the moment I dread when it goes from being cheery to being fucking furious.
So, I talked a lot about Mondo and Chihiro's case earlier, and how it's an excellent criticism of toxic masculinity, and how it affects different men in different ways, yeah? There's just one itty-bitty giant aircraft carrier full of whale semen sitting on the middle of the intriguing social commentary Suez Canal, and it has transphobia written on the hull. Before we get into that, I just want to make this statement. Whatever pronouns you elect to use Chihiro, I don't really care all that much. He, him, she, her, they, them, neos, noun selves. You can use whatever you like, and see them however you like, and the same goes for literally any other character. What I don't enjoy is seeing people just straight up harassing others for it all. And I see this behavior way more often with people who say Chihiro is a cis boy. That all ranges from concerned trolling about devaluing trans women by seeing Chihiro as a trans girl, to just calling people slurs over it. That's all uncool as fuck. The sooner we all just accept that people can use whatever pronouns they please for not only Chihiro, but for any character, we'll be able to discuss the rest of your character without pissing into each other's wheat mix. This case is still pretty disrespectful to the trans experience. Even if the character in question is not actually a member of that minority, can still be offensive to that minority, which is a logical fallacy I see get tossed around a lot to defend the case's treatment of Chihiro. Calling a straight person the F slur is still homophobic, since it's the act itself that's the issue. If you say, I'm a trans girl, to someone who's calling you the F slur because they think you're a gay man, they're not going to up and go, oh, sorry, my mistake, let me correct my bigotry, and then call you the T slur instead. They don't care if the slurs are accurate. The point is the hatred and pain. So, apply that to media, and realize that the case can be very much offensive to trans people, especially transgender women, even if Chihiro themselves is not a transgender woman. I've recommended this before, but Lindsay Ellis, despite being a cisgender woman, did a really well-researched video on transphobia in pop culture, and collaborated with a transgender woman to do so. Whatever your opinions on Ellis or ContraPoints, I certainly don't think that your knowledge on transphobia and homophobia should start and end with them. I do think the video is worth your time if you are not already familiar with transphobia in pop culture. It's well-researched and well put together, so it'll catch you up to speed. You can pause here and, watch the video if you want to, because it is a little bit relevant to the rest of the video. Well, either you're back, or you just want me to continue. Either way, let's go. Chihiro may not be explicitly written to be a transgender woman, but it's in the same way that Norman Bates or Buffalo Bill are not explicitly written as transgender women. If not because the writer doesn't believe trans women even exist, it's so the writers can claim a case of plausible deniability. Look, my character, Johnette Cannibal, wanders around wearing a dress and growing her beard, employs poorly executed methods of femininity, and murders poor little ridiculously rich cis white women in cold blood. But I stated that Johnette is a boy, so now any accusations of transphobia are irrelevant. That's a favorite tactic of TERFs. You know, the deranged, self-proclaimed feminists who insist that all men are the devil, that their vaginas make them above criticism, and write books about wizards shitting themselves. They're not good is what I'm saying. In the one bit of positivity that I can give this, Chihiro is at least a reverse of the violent crossdresser trope. Chihiro, rather than being a perpetrator of violence and a murderer or sex offender, has those crimes committed unto them, either while they are alive or after they have expired. Unlike the examples provided, Chihiro is completely pacifistic and won't even hurt a mosquito because they can't stomach the idea of killing another being. So thankfully, Chihiro largely avoids transphobic tropes in that area of characterization. Now the problem is,
everything else.
the transphobia in Chihiro's case is plentiful. For one, Chihiro's assigned gender at birth is played entirely for shock value during the trial. Kyoko was first during the initial investigation, and I'll be fair here, she is an investigator, and even if she didn't remember that, it's clear she was operating on instinct. That's a reasonable thing to do during an investigation, and she at least isn't a hypocrite since she checks over Hifumi's body later in the game and finds evidence down his trousers. What's not okay is the fact that this is the only ever trial recess in the entire series where everyone gets to go back to the scene of the crime, and it's so Sakura can also grip a corpse and announce Chihiro has a penis. Unlike Kyoko, Sakura is not an investigator. She is an MMA fighter. Sakura has no reason to touch Chihiro's body beyond Kyoko instructing her to do so, and it's purely so she can make that announcement. I'm already itching to discuss how we can better do this, but I will save that for the improvement section. But this is very clearly invasive and would not be done to a cisgender, gender-conforming corpse in this fashion. Kyoko doesn't demand Makoto stick his hand down Hifumi's pants to confirm his penis or the evidence she found exist. If you're disgusted by that mental image, congratulations! You've figured out how awful and invasive this all truly is! To summarize, the trial is stopped for the only time in the entire series, so everyone can go back to Chihiro's corpse, so one of them can grope their genitals and confirm that there's a penis in there, and once that announcement is made with a decent amount of fanfare, the intermission begins. That's playing someone's assigned gender at birth that is different to the expectation for shock value. That's transphobia. Secondly, while the reasoning gives it some context, we can't really erase the fact that the sequence of events was Chihiro told Mondo their assigned gender at birth, and a result of that, Mondo caved in their head with a dumbbell. Even acknowledging that Mondo did it because he was jealous of Chihiro's emotional strength, this is still, almost point for point, the queer panic defense, or specifically in this instance, the trans panic defense. From LGBTQBar.org, this
is a legal strategy that asks a jury to find that a victim's sexual orientation or gender identity/expression is to blame for a defendant's violent reaction, including murder. It is not a freestanding defense to criminal liability, but rather a legal tactic used to bolster other defenses. When a perpetrator uses an LGBTQ+ panic defense, they are claiming that a victim's sexual orientation or gender identity not only explains but excuses a loss of self-control and the subsequent assault. By fully or partially acquitting the perpetrators of crimes against LGBTQ+ victims, this defense implies that LGBTQ+ lives are worth less than others.
Now, there are a few arguments that Mondo fans often try to make when this is brought up. They argue it was anger at Chihiro's emotional strength, that he owned up to the crime as soon as he was found out. But Mondo didn't own up to the crime immediately, meaning he intended to get away with it initially, and only fessed up because he messed up. It also ignores that it was Chihiro stating that they were designated male at birth that caused Mondo's violent outbursts in a way that implies he would have this reaction even outside of the killing game. It's a much more violent version of the character pukes upon discovering another character is trans trope, which is obviously also transphobic. Mondo violently assaults Chihiro in their most vulnerable state. Regardless of the writers' and the fans' reasoning, this is still pretty uncomfortable for a lot of trans fans. This isn't some tragic plot device for us. The defense used to excuse Mondo's actions may wind up being exactly how they excuse our real-life murders. It's how a lot of us do wind up dying. It is how our murders are excused, especially for trans women, and even more so for trans women of color. We see this case and recognize how it reflects what might happen to us, even if the person that it happened to isn't explicitly like us. When everyone gets back to the trial room after the intermission, the terminology swap is immediate. Their pronouns are swapped to what is traditionally associated with men. While in narrative, this is considered correct by Chihiro, and we, the audience, know that because we get to see bits of them that the other characters don't, the other characters do not know this. They find out Chihiro has a penis and immediately perform the switch based solely on that information, even though they consistently use gender markers associated with women previously. Is this set a few years before transgender speak really became that well known? Yes, and I acknowledge this. This is people operating the best they can given the time. But that doesn't mean it is or was acceptable or correct. People believing the earth was flat was understandable at the time when education was not nearly as important as striking the fear of God into the peasant villages to keep them in line, but it was ostensibly wrong. It's the same here. Every defense of the case in these aspects often utilizes a logical fallacy. Specifically, the Thermian logical fallacy, in which in-universe explanations are used to justify out-of-universe bigotry or off-putting behavior, such as a race of aliens having most of their female species look like well-endowed human women who expose their breasts, and then saying that in their culture that's actually a threat. Most of the time, something like that was dreamed up by a really sleazy guy who didn't want to own up to the fact that he wanted to see titties. The same defense applies here, although not regarding titties. Mondo caves in Chihiro's brain after they confess their assigned gender at birth. Kyoko elects to keep her mouth shut but direct the others to grow up a corpse and out Chihiro upon their death, and swap pronoun markers based solely upon their genitalia. And to briefly go back to Toko, the decision to out her is written as horrific, and the decision to out Chihiro is written as necessary. Alongside all of this, separate characters make really invasive comments. Byakuya states that Chihiro's frame was wrong for a woman, and the crowning jewel for shitty comment goes to Sho, who outright states that the gender nonconformity makes her wish that she had been the one to kill Chihiro. And people are completely okay with this, even those who say they love Chihiro and wish they didn't die. What the fuck? Unlike when Byakuya was a dick to Toko, none of these characters ever get called out on that. Any excuse provided for any of this only ever draws upon an in-universe explanation, which falls apart upon realizing that in-universe explanations will always be influenced by the real life that inspired them. Now, people might assume or even decide that based on this behavior and my statements, I must not like Mondo, Sho, Hifumi, or Togami, or even Chihiro, and must consider the mere act of liking them to be problematic. But I'm 23 and I can recognize that these are fictional characters whose actions were decided by the writers, and though all of this is incredibly offensive, I don't actually believe that any of it was done with the intent to be malicious. Impact over intent, but that doesn't mean that intent was irrelevant. And I actually do like 4 out of 5 of these characters, and even though I don't like Byakuya, I do think he's the best rival character that the series had. But, with all of that finally laid out on the table, let's take a look-see at how this case can preserve its criticism of toxic masculinity while doing away with its transphobic elements.
For it like a pretzel, MHM, tight as a virgin.
I'll preface this by saying there isn't one sole way to fix this case, nor will everyone be satisfied with my rewrites. All I can do is my best. The same also applies to the last video, although I think I've done better this time. I don't think there's a problem with any of the technical information of the case. It's not particularly interesting, but it's not in the way either. That all can stay. And for simplicity's sake, I will also have Chihiro explicitly identify as a cisgender male. I will still use they/them pronouns for them, since I've done so throughout the video, and cis men are able to use they/them pronouns if they decide those are what fit them best. And yes, that includes you cisgender men watching at home! If you'd like to rewrite the case another way, I don't mind at all. I definitely don't own the concept of a case rewrite. So to begin with, let's take how everyone finds out Chihiro Fujisaki
Is designated male at birth, though I cannot say either way.
by groping the poor kid's corpse, and figure out how we can make that both less traumatic and more reliable. It was something I briefly discussed with 1's Media, but I already had some pretty good ideas on how I wanted it to be a more reliable source than the existence of a penis. One thing 1's pointed out was that Mondo and Monokuma are the only two making genuine claims about Chihiro's gender identity, and while both know more than the others, they are both unreliable narrators. Mondo is trying to hide the murder and this secret, and Monokuma later forges evidence in Sakura's trial by faking her suicide letter. That could also be used to lead Chihiro's gender being a bit more ambiguous, if you'd like to take that route yourself. With that in mind, I did initially consider Chihiro keeping a diary to document their time in the killing game, with the confession about their gender identity written inside. That, however, could be easily taken and replaced with forged evidence by Monokuma. Then I thought about them using their laptop webcam in order to keep a video log, where they'd speak about the situation they were in, and have the confession on that, so they clearly see Chihiro make it. That, however, would reveal alter ego and cause massive structural issues to the whole narrative. The third idea I had, however, seemed to be a combination of the best of those two ideas while negating the obvious weaknesses. A tape recording. Chihiro's monopad was destroyed, but they could have easily found a tape recorder and decided to use it to record
Random documents and audio logs.
in order to record information, and also to talk about their feelings regarding their gender. It'd be a far more reliable source than Mondo, Monokuma, and Chihiro's assigned gender at birth to how they feel about their gender.
Monokuma is threatening to expose all of our secrets unless one of us kills another. It's horrific. I don't know if I'm ready to tell everyone. I'm not strong like they all are. What if they laugh at me, or worse? But if I don't reconcile with this part of myself, then I'll never be strong enough to face it. I'll tell it here first. I was born male, but more than that, even if I was born with a girl's body, I'd want to be a boy. I don't really care about pronouns, but I am a boy. But boys are supposed to be tough and strong and big, and I'm weak and fragile and small. How could the others ever take me seriously like this? They'd find it completely ridiculous. But I can't hide it anymore. I need to get stronger. I need to be able to protect everyone else. Maybe I can ask one of the other boys for help getting stronger before I tell them all. Practice telling one of them before telling everyone. Like what I'm doing with the tape recording. Yeah, I think it'll work. Alright, Chihiro out.
The second thing I would like to address is the whole Chihiro comes out as AMAB to Mondo and gets killed immediately afterwards. In this hypothetical case, it really comes down to the absolute wire. Both of the 2 days pass, and Chihiro only dies at the end of the second night. In fact, everyone is confused when Monokuma doesn't out their secrets and assumes he was bluffing. However, Chihiro comes out to Mondo on the end of the first day, recording their tape recording with their gender struggle before asking Mondo to meet them in the locker room, and though non-violent, to be fair, Mondo wouldn't think Chihiro could do anything to him, to prepare for a bit of a surprise. Chihiro tells Mondo about their assigned gender at birth, but doesn't tell him the reason for why they said so just yet, just that they'd like to train together with him. He's skeptical, but he agrees to do so, and even though they're right now at clearly different levels, Mondo's happy to just keep the kid company. When Mondo meets up with Chihiro again that night, following their run-in with Celestia, though he isn't antagonistic to them, he does ask why the hell Chihiro picked now to do some training, since before they hadn't done much at all. Chihiro confesses to finding Mondo strong and wanting him to teach them how to be strong like he is, and the case continues as normal. This way, it definitely is Chihiro's confession about finding Mondo strong, and the facing of their insecurity, feeding upon Mondo's own complex of weakness in his mind that causes Mondo to lash out and murder Chihiro, rather than the confession of their gender being the catalyst. It preserves the commentary on toxic masculinity while ditching the undertones of transphobia. Everyone wins! Well, everyone that matters anyway. With the case's evidence now written like this, Kyoka can show the tape recording to everyone on the trial floor instead of demanding everyone goes back upside to start touching dead bodies. And if you're going, why didn't she just tell them about the tape recording at the start? Why didn't she just tell them about Chihiro's assigned gender at birth at the start? Now, what about the situation with Sho? I think there are many ways we can preserve a murderous subplot in her backstory without explicitly making her a serial killer. Although, to be clear, I personally don't mind it in her instance, specifically due to the rest of the circumstances, but I figure I would offer a less offensive situation for singlets. Rather than Sho being a serial killer, while she is a confirmed murderer, it is a single murder rather than a massive string of killings, but the murder was the son of a rich businessman. This son stood Toko up for multiple dates with a string of excuses, again, never intending to actually go on one with her, but simply used her for her writing talent by asking her to write sick notes and even so far as to write his own assignments. A week before they were set to graduate junior high, this boy revealed the truth. He never intended to date Toko, and he was just using her for her skill as a writer in order to get it further ahead in his life. The only problem? He was talking to Sho, who hadn't told him she was fronting. And being Toko's protector, she flew into an absolute rage. I don't think that's a perfect solution since it still does involve the murderous alter trope, even if the said kill was an understandable one. This was more of an alternate take on it, and please bear in mind that I didn't actually entirely hate Toko and Sho's system portrayal. Even on the basis of there only being 2 alters, I can understand that that was a decision to help keep character counts down.
It's CPR, I saved Dick by giving it CPR, yes, put my mouth on it.
I want it to be clear. While I hate this chapter as written, and I think the writing decisions were incredibly short-sighted, I don't think that they were written with malice. They were written by the standards of the time and country they come from, even being comparatively progressive. With that all said, however, the more offensive writing decisions still have an effect on this fanbase, even to this day. Though I disabled comments on this video in order to mitigate the inevitable harassment that would come with me addressing a topic such as this, even with a nuanced and thorough investigation, my intent is not to berate, but to educate. Education is one of the strongest tools we have against ableism and queerphobia, and if you've made it to this point with a better understanding of some of the topics provided, that's excellent. I also never expect that any solution to this will be perfect. It will always be offensive to somebody. Perfection is unattainable, both in terms of writing and social justice. However, improvement is very much achievable in both fields. We can never be absolutely perfect. There will always be something to improve. And that improvement is what we should strive for. A little bit better where we can to improve upon yesterday to make a better tomorrow. As I said, there are things I think the case did attempt that were progressive even today, and I think it did those things quite well. By learning by what it got wrong, and what was hurtful beyond the scope of the story, you can improve your own writing and make it a safer, more informed experience for your readers. And the same can be done of your work, and of the work improving on yours. That carousel of progress, stretching on to a better tomorrow. And every cog of that wheel is both worth its strengths and its weaknesses, and its mistakes. Wouldn't you agree?